Yes, now it works. Thank you, Lee. So some words about the innovation support at Karolinska Institutet. KI Innovations is providing innovation support to students, researchers, and startup companies at Karolinska Institutet on behalf of Karolinska Institutet. And we work through the entire value chain, so from inspiration and information to validation of potential for impact creation to incubation of startup companies that aim to secure an investment or launch their product or service on the market. And we provide advice and coaching. We have access to some early financing from Vinnova. We give short courses and seminars like this one, and we have a large network of experts, investors, and companies. And as you can see in the next slide, we work with all kinds of innovations coming out of research at KI. And in the current portfolio, approximately 15% of the companies are and projects are within digital health. Next, please. So how it works and where to find us. All of our services are free of charge, and we don't take any ownership in supported projects or companies. If you want to know more, you can follow us on LinkedIn or sign up for our newsletter. And you can, of course, contact us directly by email or telephone. And when the pandemic resolves, you are welcome to visit us at Innomedico. So, Lee, will you tell us something about the core facility for eHealth?
Yes, just a few words. So the eHealth core facility is a support function for researchers working to develop or test eHealth innovations. So we provide researchers with a range of services in digital health. Some examples are just, for example, we help to develop and test smartphone apps. We provide a platform for digital interventions and data collection online. We store and analyze big data, and we also host these type of seminars. So if you're interested in discussing ideas, or if you want to discuss how we could help you with some ongoing or future projects, please send us an email or just follow us on LinkedIn to keep updated on the seminars and what we're up to. So Åsa, if you please want to start with today's subject.
Yes. So today we will go through a kind of checklist on what we have discussed so far and also what we will learn today. And I think that if you have this list in mind when you develop your idea, you will be in a good position when you start to talk to investors, customers, and collaborators. And I want to emphasize that these aspects should be worked on continuously. So it's not enough to do the analysis once. And at an early stage, it might be enough if you are just aware of these things. But once you start to develop your project more actively, you need to take some action on these aspects so that you have everything in place when you're going to implement your solution. And you can take the next, Lee. Thanks. So the first point on the list is the importance to secure ownership of your assets that you would like to create impact from. And we touched upon the professor's privilege in the first seminar. And this means that you as a researcher at the Swedish university own the intellectual property that is generated within your research project. And that means that you have the right to file patent applications based on these inventions, and that you will be the owner of such patent applications. With that said, you should be aware that there are specific rules for software, databases, and education material. And these rules are outlined in section 4 of KI's IP policy, and you have the link on this slide. In addition, there are other things that might affect your commercial right to the invention, and this can include, for example, restrictions from funding bodies and collaboration agreements that can have specific conditions. Also, everyone with a double affiliation, that is, if you're employed both at the university and the hospital, need to pay some extra attention, since different rules apply in the different organizations. Also, you should make sure to secure ownership of your software and data when you enter agreements with, for example, a software developer. And one topic that we wanted to discuss in some further detail is the use of open source. And for this purpose, we welcome back Christopher from Synergård.
Yes, thank you, Åsa. I will try to share my screen. Let's see if I can do that. Sorry, wait, I have to, I will just share my screen. And do you see my screen now?
Yes.
Perfect. Yes, so open source from academia to implementation, or from the use in academia to the use in implementation. That is a core aspect to be aware of and there are some core aspects to be aware of when utilizing your source code in different ways, irrespectively if it's commercial utilization or a non-commercial utilization. And there are two key aspects we would like to talk about specifically today. First, a legal perspective. There are legal obligations connected to the use of open source softwares or open source libraries in your source code. And vulnerability perspectives. That means security perspectives, the reliability of your software. And you might ask yourself, isn't this just a question for the developers? But I would say it's for anyone, it's a question of importance for anyone using any software, and especially as being responsible for distributing it. For example, when you as a researcher have got a new software developed, and you distribute that to a partner university or to a industry partner or to the public, then you need to be aware of these two perspectives. Sorry. But first, just a short recap from the first seminar in this series. We spoke about digital innovation, and digital innovation contains of numerous different components, and where code is one of the core components. You can connect different types of frameworks for protecting each and every of these components. And why I say this in this setting is because the code is typically covered by copyright, or is always covered by copyright. That means that even if the source code is published under open source or under an open source license, that source code is covered by a person's copyright or multiple persons' copyright. That means that they have the exclusive right to exclude others from using that code. Yeah, and when you distribute the source code, even if it's non-commercially, you need to comply with these with the rules stipulated in a license under which the copyright, the open source material is distributed. So open source is just a way to utilize your, for a developer to utilize their copyright. That means that the source code is covered by certain provisions. And you need to be aware of fulfilling all these obligations. And typical obligations connected to open source is that you need to be acknowledge the original creator of the code, and that needs to be distributed. If you do not do that, then you infringe on someone's copyright, and you might be liable for that infringement. Another typical obligation in this type of licenses is that you need to distribute under the same conditions as you have received the source code under. So for example, if you have a certain type of license that states that you need to distribute all source code under this license, if you just have one line of code covered by that license, you need to have the whole software under the same license. We'll take an example to show you this. Typically, a source code or a software looks like this. You have a number of different open source libraries. Then you have your own proprietary code that glues these different open source libraries together and adds certain functionalities. I would say somewhere maybe 95% of all softwares are built in this way, maybe even more. So when most people say, okay, we have developed this ourselves, we haven't used any open source code. In those cases, they are just not aware of the use of open source code in their software. So in this case, we have one specific piece of code, the GNU 1.0 license. That states that if, as we said before, if you have used this piece of code in your software, everything should be licensed under this code, this license. So that means that the whole source code needs to be distributed free and under this license. I note here that there might be other licenses in your software that stipulates the same. That means that two of the open source licenses are in conflict with each other, and it is impossible to comply with both these licenses at the same time. So either then you can choose to, okay, I need to distribute the whole source code under this general public license, GNU license, or you have to remove that license. And of course, there still might be other licenses that comes with other types of obligations. So that's the core legal perspective, why you need to be aware of this. And for example, the Swedish company Swish was not aware of this, and therefore had to release quite a lot of sensitive code under a very allowing open source license. So even the big companies do wrong here. Then we have the vulnerabilities. So open source libraries are open for anyone. That means even for hackers. Of course, when it's open for everyone, there is a large community testing and improving the libraries from these faulties or from any backdoors provided by hackers. But that is and when they have identified any of these weaknesses, they report that to something called National Vulnerability Database, which lists all of these known vulnerabilities. And that is presented on web pages such as GitHub, etc. But what we can see is that when they have these new versions which has closed a backdoor, for example, people are typically not updating their software with the new version of that library with a closed backdoor. And one interesting case here is Equifax, which is similar to the Swedish UC, which has credit credibility checks on persons in quite a lot of countries, especially United States, who had one backdoor open. And they identified that. Of course, a lot of user data went out on the dark web. And they identified that backdoor, closed it, reported that to the National Vulnerability Database. But the download frequency of the old version of that library didn't went down with more than 5%. So the awareness of these vulnerabilities are rather low among developers. Why this is really, really important to be aware of when, especially when ordering a software product from developers, for example. That this should be stipulated in the development agreement that all code needs to be checked in relation to known vulnerabilities. So that means that, for example, if we have the same type of structure again with software, there might be certain parts that need to be removed or updated or changed in order to remove these security flaws. And you need to be aware of those. So why should you care? This is quite a short presentation. I have 3 minutes left and I will try to squeeze in the rest on those 3 minutes. So if we have KI, the university here, and they have students providing code, consultants providing code into the research project. And the research project provides a software for a partner university, a hospital, and an industry partner. What happens then if the student uses a malicious license, or not a malicious license maybe, but a license that is not acceptable to the university, and a consultant are using a piece of source code with a security flaw. That means that if the university distributes this and do not comply with the GNU, for example, the GNU license requirements, and have the security flaw, and that is distributed, everyone becomes infected. Oh, sorry. Everyone becomes infected with both the infringement in the open source or the breach of the license requirements, and with the security flaw, which we can see in numerous different companies now, when we from almost day to day hear about new security breaches. So this is a matter of credibility. Therefore, this is super important when taking your research from the academic environment to the implementation. So 3 key takeaways. The provision in the open source licenses needs to be fulfilled when distributing software. And this is irrespectively if it's non-commercial or commercial use of the software. The vulnerabilities need to be managed properly. That means that it is your obligation as the responsible one for the source code to ensure that the libraries are updated. This can seem a bit difficult, but there are actually quite a lot of different softwares for monitoring this that enables you as researchers, entrepreneurs, etc., developers, to control this without knowing a lot of coding. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Lee, are there any questions from the audience so far?
Not in the chat, or no raised hands at the moment. But
so, yeah, I would have a question. This is Stefano. Thank you for the nice presentation, Christopher. Now, I would have a question about what happens if some libraries that are in our software, they are discontinued, and then they include also vulnerabilities. So who should update those if no one is taking care anymore of these libraries?
In that case, you should probably discontinue your use of that library. It's your responsibility in the end to make sure that the libraries you are using are safe. So in that case, if you're not a coder, then I would suggest that you consult a coder for evaluating other libraries.
Yeah, and then I would have a question, because you in our previous slides there was this picture with different type of licenses, all of them may be open source, but then is there any guideline that help how do you say, developers or also other stakeholders involved to choose the right one? Because if some licenses, they are contrasting each other, it seems that your software cannot be, how do you say, distributed at all.
Yeah, we typically recommend that you set up a certain guideline system within the development process that provide such guidance. there are softwares for monitoring, for example, the OSS policy, which is an open source policy that can be set within a project. But if you're not using that kind of software, the developer needs to be needs to be aware and needs to evaluate all of the new licenses in the software. And needs to be aware of the intended utilization model, because that affects how you can choose, or which types of licenses you can choose.
Okay, thank you. Then, oh, sorry, I would have a third question, which is about the sometimes in projects, so in research projects, you are developing some piece of software, and then maybe you are testing them in a clinical setting, such as an hospital. And then we have specific rules about, how do you say, a research project and privacy to fulfill. But then when this software will become something like a product, then you have to fulfill additional, how do you say, requirements. And I was wondering if you have some experience or something about that, because it appears that the regulation will be different if it's a research project or it's a product.
Yeah, I think Aida and Maria will talk a little bit about that. So I won't discuss that too much, but I can say that as long as you, at least from a license perspective then, as long as you distribute the code, and that means as soon as the code leaves your environment at the faculty, or when you send it to another faculty, then you need to comply with the license requirements.
Okay.
So if you send out the code to a partner hospital for evaluation of the software within a research project, then you most likely will need to comply with the requirements in that license. Even though I would say the risk of getting sued in that case is fairly low. The larger company or the larger project and the more hype a project gets, the greater the risk is for getting sued for breach of licenses, for example.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry for. Thank you very much for.
Thank you. It was really good questions, I must say.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Stefano, for your questions, and Christopher for answering. I think that we will move on, and then we can come back to this if any questions arise. So I will now share my screen. So can you see that?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Lee. So we move on to the next point on this checklist that I mentioned in the beginning. And the next point on the list is to make sure that you take an informed decision around how you protect your inventions. And as Christopher explained in the first seminar, there are different pros and cons with the different forms of protection. And if we take patents as an example, patents are very expensive. So if you want to go that way, you should make sure that your patent protection will be broad and strong, because otherwise it won't be worth the money. On the other hand, if there is no protection at all, especially investors will probably be reluctant to invest in your case. And if you're more interested in this topic, you can read more at the homepage of the Swedish Intellectual Property Office, PRV. Number 3 on the list is the importance of an early interaction with your customer. And as Emma Lovén from Södersjukhuset spoke about in the last seminar, it's really important that you secure a continuous and early dialogue with your future customer to make sure that you are solving a true problem, that your solution provides enough value for the money, and also that it is technically feasible to implement your solution in the clinical environment. And for the purpose of communicating your idea to both customers and investors, we recommend to use a format called the NABC, where N stands for need, A is approach, B is benefit, and C is competition. And if we take MediTuner as an example, the need can be expressed as an optimized treatment for patients with asthma. That's the need to optimize the treatment. The approach that MediTuner has developed is a mobile app connected to a portable spirometer. The benefit on the caregiver side would be a lower number of emergency events and also less time required for routine checkups, whereas the benefit for the patient would be improved quality of life. And then competition, and in the competition analysis you should include both the existing solutions that are used today, such as paper-based treatment plans, but also similar solutions being developed. And if you're interested in the NABC concept, there is much more to look at and read. And there is a link on this page. So number 4 on the list is to make sure that you build a strong team and that you are aware of which your stakeholders are. And this is something that many teams, including Björn and Henrik from MediTuner, indicate that if they were to do the journey again, they would start this analysis earlier. And obviously it all starts with the founders team. And once you start to develop your idea, you will probably need a CEO and maybe a CSO or a CTO as well. And at this stage, you might have some investors that might want to have a place in your board of directors. Later on, you will employ more people. And when you're about to enter the market, it's very important to have a sales organization. And you might have subcontractors that will provide certain parts. Also, it's very important to have an advisory board in place. You need key opinion leaders that will act as ambassadors for your product or service. And it's also very helpful to be connected to a patient organization.
Sorry, Åsa, just interrupt. We have a question here.
Yes.
Explain what CEO, CTO, etc. stands for. I think it's a good.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yes, it's a very good point. So the CEO is the Chief Executive Officer, the VD in Swedish, which is running sort of the entire operations, also being appointed by the board of directors to be sort of responsible for the company. CSO is Chief Scientific Officer and CTO is Chief Technology Officer. So depending on the type of company, you would maybe have both, but at least one of them. So the CTO would be responsible, for example, for the software development, either through subcontractors or in-house personnel. I hope that answered the question. Yes, and then finally, you will most likely need contact with experts, especially when it comes to questions like IP, legal, and regulatory. And these experts will also be your connection to regulatory authorities and other third parties. Yes, so with that, we have reached point number 5 on the list, namely legal and regulatory frameworks. And as mentioned, Andrea from IMRAB couldn't join us today, but she has provided us with a couple of slides, and you will get these, that list the legal framework that should be considered when implementing digital health solutions. And these include the Health and Medical Services Act, the Patient Act, the Patient Safety Act, and the Patient Data Act. And there are also regulations from Socialstyrelsen. Obviously, you should also have GDPR into account, since you will most likely handle personal data. And then Andrea has listed 2 regulations on medical devices and in vitro diagnostics. And this makes a nice transition into our next guest speakers, Maria Lindgren and Ida Ilke-Choi from Key to Compliance. And you will tell us a bit more about the regulatory classification and regulations in relation to digital health solutions. So I hope that you can now share your screen.
Yes, well, I'll try to share my screen now. There, do you see my screen?
Yes, works.
Perfect. Lovely. So I'm here today with my colleague, Maria Lindgren. Maria, would you please start?
Yes, sure. So my name is Maria Lindgren. I'm a director in clinical development at Key to Compliance. And my background is I'm a chemist by training, did my PhD in Stockholm University. Been working with clinical development since more than 10 years now in both drugs and medical devices.
Yes, and my name is Ida Ilke-Choi with the difficult last name. And I work as a senior quality assurance and regulatory affairs consultant at Key to Compliance. Been working here for 5 years, and before that I worked actually at a startup. So I've sort of made this journey of starting to see market product and marketing it to the market. Well, and Maria, would you please tell us?
Yes, I just wanted to tell you very, very briefly about our company. So we're called Key to Compliance, and before September we were called Symbiotech. So we just changed our name because we went together with a firm who works a lot with training and education within the field of regulatory, but both for medical devices and pharma industry. So with Key to Compliance, we have 5 business areas. So we work with clinical development, biological development or biological evaluations, regulatory and quality assurance, as well as training. So it's just to give you an overview of this, and you can move to the next slide, Ida. So like we're talking about today, you know, how to take an idea from the academic into the market and perhaps even beyond the market. And I think the nice part, and the reason why I also come from the startup world around Karolinska, and what I like about Key to Compliance is that we actually have experts and generalists in all these fields. So you can come to us whether you're very early in your development or if you already have products on the market, and we can help you with all these different parts. So usually you start up with building a quality system and looking at risk management about your product, and then you start to prepare for your registration with preparing a technical file and all the documentation we have been talking about today. And then if you have your product on market, you need to follow your product on the market, and this is also something we could help you out with. So please contact if you have any questions, and also via Åsa. It's no problem. We'll be happy to ask and give you quotes if you want help with some parts of your development. And now I leave over to Ida, who will tell you more about the software development and in medical device field.
Yes, so thank you, Maria. That's a little bit about us at the Keto Compliance. And the agenda for this session is that we're going to talk about how you can recognize if your digital health innovation is a medical device. And then we're going to talk about the process of CE marking, which is the process that you need to go through if you want to take a medical device from idea to market. And then we're going to talk about a little bit the cost and time. And in the end of the presentation, I'm going to provide you with a checklist of what to do next if you suspect that your digital innovation is in fact a medical device. But actually, before I start with the presentation, I would very much like to get to know you in the audience a little bit better. So please do grab your phones and go into the website www.menti.com and then enter the code 2949662. So just go into the website www.menti.com and use the code 2949662. And then just answer the question, do you know what medical devices are? I've heard, I think that most of you do have a feeling for it. There, great. We got 2 people that are pretty knowledgeable within the area. Let's see if there comes other results. So we'll just wait a couple of minutes until you can go into the website menti.com and use the code 2949662. Oh, there, sort of. Oh, good. A lot of people know a lot about medical devices, and I expect to get hard questions in the end of the presentation. Great. We have 9 people voting. I think we can move on maybe. So I'll move on. Thank you for voting. It's interesting. Now we have 12 results and most people are actually pretty knowledgeable. So it's going to be interesting to hear your questions later. In this presentation, I'm going to talk broadly regarding what you're going to do. And then you're more than welcome to ask questions in the end where you want me to clarify some stuff. But the reason why I'm going to talk about digital medical devices is because a lot of digital health innovations are in fact medical devices, or they are on the borderline to be one. So therefore, I'm going to talk about how you can recognize if your digital health innovation is a medical device, and if it is a medical device, what you need to do, how does the process look. But before I go into the definitions, to show you the definition for a medical device, I'm going to talk a little bit about the regulatory landscape that we have right now. So as a manufacturer, if you invent something and you want to put it out on the market, you will be seen as a manufacturer. So as a manufacturer, you have the responsibility to ensure that your product fulfills the applicable regulatory requirements that are set on that product category. And in the area of digital health innovation, Åsa showed you previously some regulations that apply, but 2 regulations that we work with and are very important to consider is the regulation for medical devices and the national regulation for Nationella medicinska informationssystem, National Medical Information Systems, also called NME. So the regulation for medical devices are common for the whole European market. But the regulation for Nationella medicinska informationssystem is a Swedish regulation and only applied if you want to release your product to the Swedish market. And your product fulfills this definition, of course. The regulation for if you have a medical device, you can choose to fulfill the requirements set out in the medical device directives. Here we have the 3 directives, or you can choose to fulfill the requirements set out in MDR and IVDR. And we are in the middle of a transition period where where these 3 directives are being replaced by the 2 regulations, MDR and IVDR. And MDR will enter into full force on the 26th of May 2021, and IVDR will enter into full force the year after on 26th of May 2022. So if you want to put out a new product to the market, you want definitely to be working against fulfilling these 2 regulations and not these. But if you have already an old product on the market, there are some transition periods you can use. So about the definition, let's start looking at the definition of a medical device. In this context of digital health, it's important to know that a medical device can really be anything that is intended to be used alone or in combination for human beings for the purpose of diagnosis, prevention, monitoring, prediction, prognosis, treatment, or alleviation of a disease, or if it's used for the purpose of diagnosis, monitoring, treatment, alleviation of, or compensation for an injury or disability, or investigation, replacement, modification of the anatomy or a physiological or pathological process or state, or if it's a device that's providing information by the means of in vitro examination of specimen derived from the human body, including organs, blood, tissue donations, or if it's a device that's intended to control or support the conception. So all software or digital health innovation that has an intended purpose that fits into this definition are medical devices. And here you have 5 examples of medical devices because I wanted to show you what a medical device can be. And it's so interesting that you talked about the asthma tuner and the MediTuner before. I do not have time to go through these cases one by one and to explain why they are medical devices. But I encourage you to go into Google these products and then go into the manufacturer's web pages and read what the intended use or intended purpose of these devices are, and then compare it to the definition of medical devices, and you will see pretty clearly that they are medical devices. And also I want to point out that some digital health innovations or medical devices, as I said earlier, they consist of a mobile application and a gadget that has some kind of sensor. And these 2 deliver the medical purpose together, where, like these 2 examples, where in other cases, like this one, it's just the mobile application itself that delivers the medical purpose. And the next definition that's important for us to look at is the definition for NME, or National Medical Information Systems. And as I mentioned previously, this regulation is only applied for the Swedish market. And this regulation covers some products, such as the pharmacy's prescription systems, that do not meet the definition of a medical device themselves, if you look at MDR and IVDR, for example. But these products have still a great impact on the health of individual patients if they do not work as intended. So therefore, these products are regulated in Sweden, and the regulation says basically that these products that fulfill the definition of NME are to be regulated exactly the same way as medical devices are regulated. So they are to follow the same procedures and so on. And you have the full definition of NME here. Unfortunately, it's in Swedish. I don't think it's appropriate to translate the regulation by myself, but I hope that you can either read Swedish to some degree yourself, or that you will get help in understanding the text. So if you have a medical device or if you have an NME, what are you supposed to do? Basically, the work that needs to be done can be divided into two main parts. One of them being to set up processes and procedures to ensure that the organization works smoothly and that the work is performed in a compliant manner. All the processes together that ensure this are together called the quality management system, or also called the QMS. And the processes that form the QMS are, for example, regarding how your development is supposed to go, supposed to work, to be performed, how the risk management for your device is supposed to be performed. Christopher mentioned earlier some sort of risks that could pose the users to different risks, and that they need to be managed. And then there are other kind of risks. You have to think about usability risks. You have to think about if the product is used in the wrong way and so on. So you need to have a process for risk management of your device. Other processes are change management, it is incident management, or it is post-market surveillance, and so on. There are many more processes that are part of the quality management system. The second part of the work that needs to be performed is to ensure that your product is compliant. And the evidence for this is collected in the product's technical documentation. So examples of products that form the technical documentation are risk management file, requirement specifications for your product, design specifications, verification and validation test results, and also a clinical evaluation plan and report, and so on. Oops, it could be there. So medical devices are divided into different risk classes based on the risks that are connected to a certain device. The higher the risk the device has, the more requirement it has to fulfill. And that means that it's also a higher level of inspection and scrutiny, both from the notified bodies, but also from the competent authorities. For products that fulfill the definition of NME or are in class 1 according to MDR or are in class A according to IVDR, the manufacturer has to undergo a self-assessment process. And this means really that they have to ensure themselves that they identify the right requirements and that they fulfill the right requirements. So when they have done so, they declare themselves that they fulfill the regulations requirements, and then they register the product with a national competent authority. In Sweden, this would be the Swedish Medical Products Agency. So when the company has done so, the Swedish Medical Products Agency has the right to come and inspect the product documentation or the manufacturer's processes, just as a normal market surveillance procedure that they perform. They do it yearly, or if they suspect that some safety issues are not addressed. But if a product is in a slightly higher risk class, for example, in class 1M, 1S, or 1R, which stands for devices with measurement function, devices that are sterile, devices that are surgically reusable instrument. If the product belongs to this risk class, a notified body will be reviewing parts of your product documentation and processes that are related to that specific risk class. So for example, if you have a sterile product, the notified body would be reviewing parts of your product documentation that are regarding to maintain the sterility of the device. And here you have some examples of notified bodies. And a notified body is essentially a private company that has been accredited by different competent authorities, such as the Swedish Medical Device Agency, Medical Products Agency, or other agencies in Europe that also have this area of responsibility. They accreditate the notified body to participate in the inspection and surveillance of medical device manufacturers to ensure that they fulfill the product safety regulations requirements. And finally, if your product is in an even higher risk class, for example, in class 2A to class 3, according to MDR, or class B to D according to IVDR, the inspection will be even more comprehensive. So there are different routes a company, a manufacturer can take to market. There are at least 4 different routes, and it's also dependent on the exact classification of your device. And I'm not going to go into the details because we really don't have time for that. But a typical route to take is described in Annex 9 of MDR and IVDR. And this includes that the quality management system is certified, and it includes also a full assessment of the technical documentation for the product. And it will be notified body that performs this. And when notified body has performed their inspection, they will give the manufacturer a certificate. And when the manufacturer has that certificate, they can register the product and start selling. If they do not have that certificate, it's illegal to sell the product and to market the product. And something that's interesting for manufacturers and for you in the audience, I guess, to know is that most of the softwares will be in class 2A or higher according to MDR and IVDR. This is a big difference from the rules and regulations stated in MDD and IVDD, where most software actually was in the lowest risk class and the manufacturers used a self-assessment process. Now they have to use a notified body to be able to market their products. And this adds to the costs, and it adds to the certification time or the process where you get your product approved. And on that note, we can move on and look at the costs and time associated with this process. So this is, of course, very hard to estimate how much it's going to cost that you come to market with your product. But we have done a very, very rough estimation. And the estimation, how much it does cost for your product, it's really dependent on the classification of your device. It's dependent on if how many parts your product consists of, if it's just an app or if it's also a gadget, because if it's a gadget and has some electronics, there are more requirements and more standards that you have to use, and maybe your setup needs to be tested by a notified body and so on. But we have estimated some costs, and we think that it's reasonable to think that your CE marking will take about 1.6 million to 1.8 million Swedish koronas. And we have divided the costs into these 4 categories, where there are some costs related to the notified body because the review, and there are some costs related to building up the quality management system that the company needs. And there are some costs connected to building up the technical documentation that shows that your product is compliant. And also there are some costs for performing clinical evaluation of your device and product. And the estimated timing is about 1 year to 1.5 years from start, when you start to work fulfilling the regulatory requirements, to submitting the documentation to the notified body. And there will also be some lead times at the notified body, but I do not dare to estimate these, since it varies a lot with different notified bodies and also their workload at the time. And now we have finally come to the end, and I will provide you with a checklist of what to think about if you want to make this journey. So first of all, think about the intended use of the product. Think about the purpose of the device. And I see that you have been talking about it in earlier sessions. Also referred to it, I believe. The intended use is really that you need to think about which users are going to use the device. Are there professional healthcare personnel, or are there lay users? That means that is it just users, private persons? Who are you going to target with your device? What problem are you going to solve? Think about the environment in which the device will be used in, because that affects a lot the requirements you will set on your product. Is it a product that is going to be used in an operational setting? I mean, in the hospitals where they perform operations, or is it a device that is used in the homes, or is it used in the pharmacies, and so on? And think carefully about the claims you want to make about your product. Do you want to say that your product can be used for treatment of a certain disease, or for investigation of a certain process in the body? Then you need to have proof for that in your technical documentation. So think about the intended use and the purpose of the device, and also take a look at the medical purpose or definition of medical device if you want to claim something like that. And the next step is evaluate if your product fulfills the definition as medical device. And if yes, classify your product, because that determines which conformity assessment route you can take. I have provided a guidance document that describes the qualification and classification process, and it will be provided to you in the handouts. And then if your product does not fulfill the definition of a medical device, take a look at the definition of NME and see if your product fulfills that definition. Because if so, you need to comply with the medical device regulations anyway, at least if you want to market your product in Sweden. And if your product fulfills the definition of medical device or NME, then you need to go to step 4, which is to set up the quality management system and the technical documentation. And if you have any problems along the way, contact us or contact OSA, and maybe we'll be in touch. So thank you very much for your attention. Any questions?
So we have a question from Fernando, please.
Hello, thank you for the short lecture. You have talked about what do we need to do to put the device through the market, but many of us, we are researchers, and prior to this compliance activity, we need to sort of test the device just to see that it actually does what it's supposed to do. So with this type of prototypes, do we need also to notify the Läkemedelsverket that we need to follow all this regulation, or we can just do it with ethical approval?
Yeah, very good question. Thank you. Well, actually, it's a part of the CE marking process. And when you set up your product, you have to think about your claims. And when you think about your claims, you need to ensure that during this process, you actually have proof for your claims. So if you have a device that maybe, I don't know, some sort of application that's going to be used for treatment for depression, then you need to ensure that your application actually is effective in the treatment of depression. And that's called the clinical evaluation. Maria, would you like to fill in here?
Yes, so I understand the perspective. I'm also a researcher from the beginning, and I think what you should consider is that when you do this testing and trying to understand how your device works, please start document it, because that's something that you could use and add into your research and development later on. And I understand it's tough and there's a lot of costs involved in doing this part, but they will save costs and make it easier if you do it as early as possible. And when you talk about doing testing, that really depends on how you're going to do the testing. Because if you're going to test it on patient, if there's any intervention in some way, you would have to apply and comply with the ISO standard, for instance, for a clinical investigation. And then as your product is not on the market yet, you would have to apply for the Läkemedelsverket as well for approval to do your study, as well as an ethical approval. But if it's not interventional, then maybe an ethical approval would be enough. But you always need to consider that you have informed consent, either from the patient or for the user, and also according to this GDPR that you're allowed to collect the data that you are collecting.
Yes, but as long as you haven't entered into the stage of gathering data for clinical evaluation, when you are before that, the MDR will not be in place yet. So it will be just, as you say, ethical approval and Läkemedelsverket, but not MDR.
Well, parts of MDR will need to be approved because you have to have proof that your device does not hurt the patients, for example. So you have to have come to some extent in your development process.
But that's not MDR, that's Declaration of Helsinki. That's already there. I mean, already in the Declaration of Helsinki, you need to prove that it's safe.
Yes, if you test on patients, if the product is not approved for the market, you need to go via the Läkemedelsverket and approval. It's when your product is already documented to be safe that you're allowed to test it further without approval.
Yes, but you do this outside MDR. I mean, you do all this.
It doesn't have anything to do with the MDR. This is just general. You're not allowed to test new medical devices on patients without an approval from Läkemedelsverket.
That's that I know. But I wanted to make sure that MDR did not raise the documentation requirement for this type of activities.
Actually, there are requirements in MDR that you have to have proof that your device is safe before you do clinical studies.
Clinical studies or clinical evaluations?
Clinical studies. Your clinical evaluation, which is more of a, I would say, an exercise in documentation and literature search. This you can do as early as possible, I would say. And this is really good to get the, like a researcher, you understand, do sort of a review of the literature out there and the evidence that you can use to support the use of your product. I think that you should do as early as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Thank you for the question.
We have another question. Farad, please.
Yes, can you go and show your definition of medical device, please, again?
Yes, sure.
I think it was the second slide.
Yes, just a second. I will go to the right slide. There.
My question is mostly about the prevention, because I think the other one is mostly clear, what is diagnosis and what is monitoring. Let's say, for instance, if we have a protective equipment, is it like, for instance, helmet, which is normally is covered by the PPE, personal protective equipment? Is it gonna be now overlapping with medical device? Because the helmet that you are wearing can prevent, let's say, brain injury, or is it just as before?
Yeah, that's dependent upon the claims you have for the device. If you claim that if you use this helmet, you will not get hurt because of, it's so hard to find a intended use, but if you, for example, the masks that they are using in the hospitals,
yes,
they can be used in some other settings where you do not claim that they protect the health. You have it for example, for when you're building or when you're painting the walls. But if they are used in the hospital setting to protect either the patient or the health personnel, the company has claims that are medical, and then you need to follow this regulation because of that.
Yeah, you have a medical benefit claim.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, even in the painting, you are still somehow claiming the medical claim. Yeah, because it's about the injuries for the lung. So I think probably is one of the gray areas anyway. So
yes, it is. But you could think about the difference between sort of medical application and medical devices and for instance drug, where you have more of a physical thing. And I think the medical claim, then I'm not sure. It depends a little bit on this mask, like Ida said, what they claim. If they claim just to filter out something, maybe that's what they're claiming and not the medical benefit. So it really, like Ida mentioned, it's really important when in the beginning of your innovation of your device to understand what kind of claims you could have for your device, because it really decides maybe which risk class you will end up or whether you are a medical device at all.
Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's see if we have any more questions. Yes, we have Alexandra. You raised your hand. Hello.
Yes, I have. I mean, this is all new to me, so thank you so much for informing me about what is it. This is a great presentation for me. What I'm wondering is about what we do is that we develop. I mean, a very broad perspective to that. We're developing internet-based therapies, and I was just curious when you said that you need to have the Läkemedelsverket approval as well for that, because it's obviously the content of such therapy is a treatment, and it claims to be to help people with certain psychological issues. So I'm just wondering, is it a standard procedure that you're supposed to always go and ask for Läkemedelsverket approval, and how do you do that if you have to?
It really depends on what kind of data you will collect at that time.
Mm-hmm. So what would be the defining feature of the data that I need to get approval from Läkemedelsverket for?
Yeah, usually you discuss with the Läkemedelsverket, then you have to have like a clinical investigation plan. So you need to describe what you're going to do. And you usually start with like a research question, you know, what is the study going to give you data on, and why are you doing the study? So you need to define this and describe in a plan. And you also need to discuss, you know, the benefits for the patients or potential benefits if you're successful in your study or your product development against the risks.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like the early things you need to consider.
That's what we normally do with the ethical approval, and I have just never heard of anyone contacting Läkemedelsverket. Maybe I don't know much about it, but I'm wondering who you contact then. Is it some standard procedure? With who can you check that?
Yes, that there is a registration which you can apply for, but I think it really depends on what kind of data you will collect from the study and whether your patient population is a vulnerable population and so on. So there is a lot of criteria for this. But I think there is a site called Kliniska prövningar, clinical trials.
Exactly.
I think it's Vetenskapsrådet or somewhere who has explained this on a very good level. I can add this into to Åsa so she can distribute it. This explains very well where you need the clinical trial approval or not.
All right.
Yeah,
okay.
And the process is also described on the Swedish Medical Device Agency's homepage on a broad level at least. So that's a good place to read to.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Very good question.
We have a question on the chat here from Mats. So in vitro diagnostic methods are classified as a medical device? ?
Yes, I have a definition of the in vitro diagnostic products that are a category of medical devices. I didn't show it earlier, but I've included it here in the handouts. So any device that's going to give you information concerning physiological or pathological process or state, or concerning congenital or physical mental impairments, or to determine safety and compatibility with potential recipients, and to predict treatment response or reactions, and so on. You see the full definition here. And I can understand if it sort of comes as a surprise for a lot of people, because I think I mentioned it earlier, the requirements in the MDR and IVDR have been raised a lot from the previous directives. And a lot of products have been classified up in the hierarchy so that they need more control. So if this is new to you, it's not just that maybe you're new to the area, it's also because that the regulations have been redone. Is this the answer to the question maybe, or do they need clarification?
Well, this is Mats. I was just surprised that I thought in vitro diagnosis was a separate entity, separated from medical devices.
Yeah, they are separate category. That's why in vitro diagnostic device has their own regulation. We have exactly. MDR and IVDR, and this is a definition from IVDR, but in vitro diagnostic device is part of the broader category of medical devices.
Okay, I see. All right, thanks.
Okay.
Great. So I think we thank Ida and Maria so much for this presentation. I think the amount of questions showed that there is a need to look more into these questions. I have one final slide in my presentation. And number 6 on my list is exactly this. The recommendation is that you take help from people. And our experience at KI Innovations is that people are very willing to help. And this is true not only for the innovation support system, but also for investors, other startup companies, and of course, consulting companies like Synergon and Keep to Compliance. So with this, I leave it to Lee to wrap this up.
Yes, we have 5 more minutes. So just if we have any more questions or comments, could be for Christopher or Ida or Maria or for me and Åsa. This is your chance. I see that some people are raising their hand, but I just think Fernando and Farad, you just forgot to unraise your eyes, I think. But if you didn't, please feel free to ask your question. No. I don't think we have any more questions. So thank you so much, Christopher, Ida, Maria, also Åsa. Thank you. I think on behalf of both KI Innovations and eHealth Core Facility, I want to thank you all for participating. Some of you have been here for all 3 seminars, some of you just for 1. As I said earlier, we will share both the PowerPoints and the recordings, so we will get back to you with information on where to find it. And please don't hesitate to contact us if you have questions or suggestions on topics that you would find interesting. And with that said, I just want to say thank you and goodbye. Have a nice afternoon, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.